Hello, hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video, but I am not alone. We have a first-time guest on the channel, Mr. SMZ Plays. How's it going, man? How are you doing today?
Doing very well. How about yourself?
Pretty good. So today we're going to be discussing the new Fusion Exchange system, and specifically we're going to be talking about the Tier 2 champions, or the champions in Tier 2. We did film a part 1 of this video. You can check it out on his channel. That will be linked in the description box down below, as well as in the YouTube collaboration feature you're probably watching through now. But yeah, if you want to hear our takes on the Tier 1 champions, be sure to go check out that one. But today, or this video, we're going to be focusing on Tier 2. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And we can start off with one of the champions that I'm missing on my account. And I will lament about this guy, but Opardin Clanfather. So he is a barbarian champion who, honestly, at the time, from what I've heard, was relatively underwhelming. I was not playing the game at this time, so I could not complete the fusion back in, I think, 2022. But I think he was relatively underwhelming. He did get a buff fairly recently, within the past half a year or so. And I think he saw a bit of a resurgence when it came to Chimera with the Senna in combination. But I think very, very few people have Senna. So if you don't have her and you don't intend to use him to kind of supermax your Chimera turns and thus your damage, probably not going to be worth your while. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Opardin, when he, as you said, when he came out, was not a good champion. I would say wasn't used as much. He did have this ability which was termed as niche and might get uses in the future. The passive that he boosts turn meter, and it did with Senna and the Chimera. I did the fusion. I do have him, but he was sitting in my vault for a very long time, up until I randomly pulled like 6-star soul for him. And then I built him up, and I do run him in my Faction Wars Hard 21 team. He is helpful over there because he does provide the cleanse, the turn meter boost, but certainly not a champion that I would be fussed about missing out on or spending my tokens to get this champion.
Yeah, definitely agree on that one. And yeah, I had to hear through the vines of the grapevine as far as how people or what people thought of him. And I was like reading the kit. I'm like, I think he's not good. And then everyone's like, no, he wasn't. I'm like, okay, I no regrets on missing that one. So definitely will not be using my tokens for him. So next up we have Supreme Elhain. Take it away.
Yeah, Supreme Elhain. I'm gonna surprise you right here. She is. I know not a lot of people are fans of Supreme Elhain. I am a huge fan though. So Supreme Elhain is she's also the what is it? The logo, the portrait on my account, and she's one of my most used champions. I absolutely am a huge fan. She does just one thing, which is damage, but she does it quite well. I do have a 6-star soul, and that might be biasing why I'm so high on her, but she is one of the highest damage dealers on my account. Her A3 smacks really hard. The fact that it goes in from an extra turn into the AoE smack, she pairs extremely well with the Gore Crescent relic from I think it's the Chimera group, and she's fantastic. She resets the cooldown of her A2 and A3 repeatedly, and she cannot get decrease attack, which is insane. And she inflicts just a lot of damage. Her base attack is also pretty nice. Of course, not as good as some of the other broken champions that have been out in the meta recently. But I am a huge fan. Given that most people will not have a high soul on her, would I recommend anybody spending 2 tokens to getting her? Probably not, unless you have that soul sitting. And if you do, she's going to blow you away. I've had a lot of people who I've helped out with Faction Wars Hard, and a lot of people, even though they don't use her anywhere else, but in Faction Wars Hard, incredible nuker. Does a lot of damage. So huge fan of Supreme Elhain.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, I definitely am kind of mid on her. But that said, this faction is lacking in terms of just kind of raw DPS. Basically, you have like Yannicka if you don't have Supreme Elhain. Obviously, Solinar is kind of changing that a little bit. But he, as far as, at least as of this recording, he's not been offered up in a guaranteed form. So who knows if you're going to get him in the long term. But Supreme Elhain could be worth it. But again, for the 2 tokens, probably not your highest priority. But I use her as well in Faction Wars, and she's kind of my most powerful DPS. So she could definitely do some work.
And not just in Faction Wars, by the way. Again, depends on what blessing you have her, but I would say try her out if you have at least a decent blessing, at least a 3-star blessing or 4-star blessing, ideally 4-star. Just try her out in other places. She'll surprise you. She's one of my most used champions.
So next up, we have Vlad the Nightborn, who's from the Undead Horde. Now, he's a very, I don't want to say controversial, but an intriguing champion. I do think, generally speaking, he is relatively underrated, just because he has the problem that a lot of utility nukers, I'll call them, have in the game, where if they have a lot of utility, they usually don't hit hard. It's a rare combination to get both at the same time. Partially for game balance, perhaps, but overall, that's just the trend. But nonetheless, Void Legendary, AoE decrease defense, and block active skill, so he's a decent form of CEC. And then turn meter control here with AoE Leech, decently strong. I use him probably a lot more than other people, just because AoE block active skills is pretty useful for controlling things. Like, he's one of my auto Doom Tower hard wave champions, just to set it and forget it. But is he worth 2 tokens? Probably not in the modern era. I think he's predominantly a PvE champion, and if you have anyone better for control, then they're better than this guy, and he's not worth the tokens, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. He did get a buff, so his A3, which has the block active skills, I believe, it used to be single target, and then he got a buff, and now it's AoE. And since he's gotten that buff, I think he's become more useful for wave control. And block active skills is just a fantastic ability. Also against the mythical champions, one of the best ways to counter mythical champions, I would say. I personally did get him with the fusion. I have built him out. I did use him in some niche stages in Centranos. And that's where I use him at the moment. However, he's also quite useful, again, in niche stages in Faction Wars hard. For locking down the waves, of course, but also because he is a decent damage dealer, and the fact that he's void for stage 17, the stage where you have to do damage without landing weak hits, he's instrumental. Very niche. Personally, probably will not go for him unless you're struggling with that kind of niche situation. Then I think he's worth it. But for most accounts, probably not.
Yep, 100% agree with that take. So next up, we have Sanguine Maria.
Yeah, Sanguine Maria was a very controversial champion. She was the Halloween fusion in the year past 2025. She was so before she was released, she was nerfed or changed, however you want to say. And many people blame content creators for the nerf or whatnot. But even with the nerf, she's still a pretty good champion. She's a very good damage dealer. I personally do not use her just because I have other better damage dealers, both in the faction and in general. But I've heard good things. The problem with Sanguine Maria is that it's very conditional. A lot of her kit. It's very confusing. You have to wait 3 turns. It has to be 2 turns. It has to be certain amount of HP. Will ignore certain amount of defense. All that stuff is very hard to keep track of, especially in PvP. But as hard as it is for you to keep track of, it's even more difficult for your opponent. So you could keep that to your advantage. Would I spend the 2 tokens for Sanguine Maria? Probably not. But yeah, might be niche useful for some niche areas of the game like Centranos or Curse City. Centranos or Faction Wars.
Yeah, I'm basically in the same place with her. I think it's a good shout that even as complicated as she is, it's even more so for your opponent. So if you learn her, you learn how to use her properly, she can definitely surprise your enemies. They won't be ready for the extra turns to come out of the A3 or the A1. And then you might just ignore it. Wait, my champion was under block damage. What happens? Like, well, actually, it's her 3rd turn. So if you really master her, she can do a lot of things, even up until the high end. It's just kind of a high skill ceiling type of champion, if you will. But yeah, probably not worth the 2 tokens, unfortunately. But that's just kind of the nature of nukers. There's attack nukers, unfortunately, are a dime a dozen in the game. So you have a good set of them, you don't really need many more than that. All right, so next up we have Tholin Foulbeard, who is kind of, I guess he came into the game as like Thor 2.0, I want to say, at the time of his release. And he has definitely had the primary niche, I would say, as far as like Hydra Clan boss But cool AoE on the A1 with the weaken, increased attack on himself, and then, pretty hard-hitting ability here. So kind of just a nuker, kind of like Thor, just big damage in the longer battles. I think he does have some activation of his abilities here automatically every few turns, and just kind of the same vein of like being a utility nuker, but he actually does damage, surprisingly, at least relative to bosses. So super strong, good pairing with like an Ugo, someone or anyone, I guess, who brings in decreased defense, because he brings in the weaken, so you can maximize your damage that way. But as far as tokens, kind of depends. If you're really desperate for a third Hydra team, maybe he can come into play, but in a vacuum, you might have better options if you have, your ninja from long ago, if you've been playing for a while, or you have one of the more recent Hydra specific champions, then he might not be the greatest value for the 2 tokens.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to Thor in a way. You just mentioned that as well, and I like to place him there. He's a very good damage dealer. With his passive, he also triggers that AoE A1 quite well, and his A2 is fantastic. His A2 ignores a lot of defense, and one of the most underrated parts of his kit is that he decreases the attack of the targets up to 25%, right? And he increases his own attack. He's fantastic with bosses for that very reason, because the bosses then hit much less hard in comparison to before. So that's why he also slots into a lot of people's early mid-game Demon Lord teams for that very reason. So fantastic champion because of that. Very good damage dealer. I actually would put him as one of the champions who I would spend the tokens on. Again, depending on where your account is, but for a lot of like mid-game players, early game players, definitely worth it. End game players, unless you have a Trunda, he's going to be your next best damage dealer in your Faction Wars hard team for waves. For bosses, there are several champions like Acrizia, like Newt, but for boss, there are not as many champions out there. So I'm a big fan of Tholin.
Yeah, I could see that you're swaying me a little bit there, but I'm a little biased because I have Hurndig, who we'll get to a bit later. And so they kind of fill the same role as the squishy but strong utility DPS. And then I also have Arnorn, who kind of just blows everything out of the water. So Tholin for me has not seen any play, but I can be a little bit biased against him because I don't use him. But I do think he can he's stronger for most players out there, I will say.
Yeah. And I agree with you because you have Hurndig, and Hurndig is another damage dealer. One of the other things I just wanted to highlight with Tholin is that he pairs extremely well if you have like Queen of Hearts, because Queen of Hearts has AoE defense down on the A1, and when you do an ally attack with her, you can basically have on the whole wave defense down and weaken just with that ally attack if you have Tholin in the team, which is a fantastic combination that I've used in many waves. Again, Queen of Hearts is a void legendary. So, depending on if you have her.
We can all have her in our dreams.
She's the queen of our dreams.
Yeah,
She's
exactly.
not named correctly.
Yeah. So, next up, we have Esme the Dancer.
Yeah, Esme the Dancer was, I believe, the fusion from last year for Valentine's.
Correct.
And I initially was high on her, just reading her kit. She brings a lot of utility. She brings block buffs. She brings decreased speed, weaken. Is it decreased speed as well, or is it increased speed?
Increased speed.
Confusing that. Increased speed, increased accuracy. A lot of utility in her kit. There's a part of her passive which also basically increase the turn meter of your highest attack champion by 50%. That's massive. But with all that said, she's been sitting in my vault. And also her A1 is fantastic because she gives the increased attack A1 on everybody. So if you're early game, mid game, you might be using her in your Hydra team just because of the amount of utility that she brings. But otherwise, she falls flat. She's one of the options, in one of the few options available for one of the Cintranos like funnel stages where you get stuck in Soul Cross. So she helps with that. But otherwise, not the best champion. I personally wouldn't advise anyone beyond mid-game or early mid-game to spend the 2 tokens for her. But again, that's just my opinion. And I haven't used her enough to know more. Have you used her, Kads?
You actually kind of nailed it. The only time I broke her out was for that one iteration of S8 in Soulcross. I remember it because it took forever. It took like 22 minutes, but I digress. She's okay. I think her problem was that she came out after Estrid, and she's just kind of Estrid light, and it's just kind of not the same utility. There's no extra turns. There's no decreased speed. Well, block buff is a nice bonus, but then I think the buff removal here, or one of these, she's like stealing buffs is good, but it's only if the partner, but she can remove buff, but it's not on the same ability. So it just, she doesn't cycle as cleanly as Estrid does. And then the increased attack is only for one turn, so it falls off so fast. And she's a 1-3-4 champion, as I like to call it. So one here, 3-turn cooldown here, 4-turn cooldown here. So it's just kind of awkward. She throws in 2 A1s every few turns, and you may or may not get the value out of the increased attack. So I think if they kind of rearranged her buffs and debuffs, she'd be a lot better. But as she stands, yeah, she's kind of relatively underwhelming, unfortunately. All right, next up we have Mad Hatter, a very, very popular champion and probably contention for one of the better value champions from tier 2, with just kind of everything in his kit, to be honest. I feel like every time I read his kit, I find out something I forgot that he did. But we'll start with his kind of bread and butter ability, which is kind of the Teox-esque ability here. But AoE attack, whoever you target, or AoE attack places the hex in the weekend, but whoever you attack, you bring in your highest crit damage ally, and they join in. And they do damage for 10% for each, extra damage for 10% for each debuff on the target, which again, underrated part potentially of the kit. If you stack the right enemy with the right amount of debuffs, whoever you bring in will absolutely smack. But he also kind of works well in any buff extension teams with the 3-turn cooldown here. So he's good with the Titus Wixwell comps, or just any type of Infinity comp, or just perma buff squad. And then obviously you bring the weaken to the team. If someone else brings decreased defense, you can keep your team running. You can debuff spread on the A1 here to enemies under hex, which is kind of nice, but if it's single target, it doesn't really matter. And then sneaky part that I always forget, he just heals everyone for free. Every 10 turns, you just get a free heal, 20% of your max HP. And you can also be a little bit of CC with the True Fear. Not the most useful thing, because you don't really want your enemy waves getting turns and whatnot, and most bosses are immune to True Fear, but it can come in clutch in like faction wars and whatnot.
Definitely. I think a fantastic champion. I would spend 4 tokens for him if I didn't have him. He's that good. I think he's one of the best champions for Hydra, because just the sheer amount of utility he brings. He brings the hex, he brings the weaken, and he also removes any debuffs from you. He from your team, and then from with his A1, he also removes any buffs that the enemy has. Fantastic champion. Debuff spreads as well, and I run him in a provoke set. And then he's one champion that fulfills so many roles in the Hydra. He's the one spreading hex, weaken, ally attack, provoke, everything. So fantastic champion. And the part of the passive with the fear. So that's the one thing. Like just before filming this, we were talking about it. I started a new account after 5 years of playing, and I never read this part of his kit. The True Fear part of this kit just never made sense to me until I started that new account. And in that new account, sometimes I go against in Classic Arena, I go against people who have him on their defense teams, and there that True Fear can be super annoying, because every 6 turns does happen. Those battles do go a bit long, and that True Fear has been the bane of my existence whenever people have him on defense. Again, as you said, you find out something new about his kit every time you read it, and I agree. Another very good part of his kit, and which is very useful for endgame players, is his A1. So the Faction Wars Hard 21 boss is I think the Tainted Mirror, and the Tainted Mirror is, in my opinion, the most difficult boss in Faction Wars Hard. And he has a minion which puts the provoke, and he puts the reflect damage on himself. And Mad Hatter is fantastic because of the provoke. He goes after him, and he removes the reflect damage, and your allies end up staying alive. So fantastic champion for that niche as well. I'm a huge fan. I can go on for hours talking about him. I'll just stop right here.
No, he's definitely worth the praise. I definitely think I utilize him personally on my account, but like I said, every time I read his kit, I'm like, he does that too. So he's a really solid champion. I think he could help a lot of people out for sure, and he's definitely worth the 2 tokens.
All right, next champion on the list is then Shy'Ek, the Packmaster, the champion that all of us really bashed on Plarium to release because they said that they would, and then, or actually it was the other way around. They said that they would release a dog champion. So Shy'Ek came out, I think, 2 years ago, and then it was said that there will be more dogs added to the game, and then there weren't. And Packmaster basically sat in the vault until Crochat came on the picture. Without Crochat, Packmaster is an okay Hydra support. He brings block buffs, and he brings the reflect damage on himself, but that's pretty much it. The AoE attack on the, not AoE attack, it's the ally attack on the A1. It becomes AoE if you have Crochat on the team because Crochat has AoE A1. But he's not really going to be a good champion without Crochat. If you have Crochat, then I think he's worth the 2 tokens to get him. Otherwise, I don't think so. Decent champion who also becomes very useful for one of the best Hydra damage teams between himself and Crochat. So I'm a fan, but only if he brings his pack with him, essentially.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I can't remember the numbers, but I think if you have a Crochat on his own, he does X amount of damage, and then you bring in the Packmaster, it's like double or triple, somewhere between there. So like it's a big difference. You don't think about it, but whenever he's attacked, all the beasts will counterattack, and whenever he A1s, which is on every 3 turns, he brings in Crochat with him. So you're getting so much more AoE A1s than you might think from any hounds on the team. And actually, shout out to one of my clanmates, but he runs a double Crochat team. He has a lot of fun with that in Hydra, which is kind of interesting. They kind of fight each other for damage, but nonetheless, it's a fun concept. But I'll just add in there that he's also a Hex champion. It is only for 1 turn, but all he has to do is be attacked, and he does draw a lot of aggro because he can taunt as well. So he draws aggro to himself. You get free Hex out there. He can be your Hex champion, and I run him actually in a cursed set, so that even when he does his attacks as well, he can bring a little bit of Hex, because as long as he places the Hex, doesn't matter if it's from the set, then you get the extra 20% damage. So good. Really solid champion. But yeah, only worth it if you already have Crochat. I would draw the line there, and I don't know if it's worth trying to go get them both, because that might take a good amount of time, but could be worth it depending upon your goals and your needs. So next up, we have Mother Cybele or Cybele, depending upon how you want to say her name. I'm going to go with Cybele, but she is a really random champion who's, I guess you can kind of tell by my tone, probably not worth the 2 tokens, unfortunately. She did have a little bit of a day in the sun with Hydra when it first came out, because of this AoE A1. Like, you literally ignore her other abilities, which is not what you want to see on a legendary champion. But she could just spam decrease speed, kind of like a Krisk, and you put her in a provoke set, or you put her in a curse set, something like that. She can just be decrease speed plus whatever else other set you put on her, and then she can fill her turn meter. Just basically spam her A1. So kind of useful, but very niche, and don't really think she's worth much in terms of the token exchange.
I mostly agree with you there. I skipped her fusion, but I did pull her afterwards, and she does have one use, and I think that's a very interesting use, very important use, and that is on Sand Devil. If you're an early to mid game and you do not have a good Sand Devil team, like a Godseeker team, for example, then the Revive on Death that she has on her A2, that's fantastic. If you can book it down, then basically it's kind of like the Godseeker composition, where you can have herself and the Reviver come right back after. If you can speed tune her well, then she can unlock those higher stages of Sand Devil for you. But if you have a Godseeker, which is easier to pull anyways, because she's a Void epic, again, Void, so not as easy as some of the other epics. Maybe it is because it's a smaller pool. But regardless, that's the one area that I see her being useful. But otherwise, yeah, she's not worth the tokens unless you're just struggling in that one area and you've been super unlucky to get decent champions for the Sun Devil.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good shout. I never thought about using her for that. I do think that anyone who has Revival and Death on a 3-turn cooldown gets kind of wonky because the Sand Devil has his big AoE on a 4-turn cooldown. So you may or may not be depending upon decreased speed to land in order to slow you down enough to kind of match up. But it is a good shout. Yeah, that Revival and Death didn't think about that.
I think there was some, and again, this is old, but there was a way that you should book her A2 until you get her to a 4-turn cooldown and not a 3-turn, and then she works perfectly. Some strategy around that. It's been a while since I've touched her for that.
Yeah, no, that tracks with what I would expect. Right, next up, Strategos Islin, however you say it.
I have no idea. So Strategos, I'll just call him Strategos Islin. So he's a champion. I did get him, but I just got him because I like collecting the Pokemon, and I didn't build him out for the longest of time. He's a champion who can be very useful because he has a lot of survivability in his kit. He is very difficult to kill if you build him right. He just heals himself constantly, and he has the ally protection and everything, increases his defense. So he's a good champion. However, I personally, I was hard stuck on one of the faction wars hard stages, and I built him up just for that. But what I found later on is that Skoramus, which is a epic champion, he does his job a little bit better, being an epic champion, HP based. So he's again going back into my vault. Maybe I am being harsh on this guy, but I personally am not a huge fan of Islin. With that said, again, if you're lacking a very good tanky support champion on your faction, and for whatever reason you don't have Skoramus, then maybe worth going on. But I would never spend the 2 tokens to get this guy.
Yeah, I definitely I see where you're at with him, and I'm probably even lower on his capabilities. even when he came out, I know like a lot of people were fans of him in the Hydra progression phase, just because AoE decrease speed slows them down. You can provoke. This was a little bit wonkier. Now it's a little bit better after they kind of fixed to provoke interactions with the Head of Decay, so he'll actually target that head on auto. If you aren't careful with the ally protection, he can die very, very easily. He does heal, but if he takes everyone's damage, he just kind of falls over. So he can be a tank in the right situations. He could be good for Hydra, but is it worth popping the 2 tokens for? Probably not, unless you're extremely desperate to get a single target provoke. But hopefully you have better options for that, or you go for Wixwell, perhaps tier 1, who does the same job but a lot better.
I was just being kind to him because I thought maybe you're high on him. I would have been even more critical.
No, I have. He's a lovely faction guardian in High Elves. He's worth 10 speed on my Arbiter, and that's about it.
Yep, that's his best use.
Yep. All right. Next up, we have Razelvarg, who's another kind of... there was definitely an era, 2022, 2023, where they're releasing a lot of Hydra-esque champions. So Razelvarg kind of fits into that category. I know a lot of people have been high on this guy. I'm not one of them, unfortunately, but I'll try to be relatively impartial here. But he's one of the few champions in the game who is fairly unique, because he does his damage scales off attack and speed. And he also increases his speed for each increased speed buff he places, which he gets from the A3. So he gets faster and faster, up to 100 extra speed over the course of a longer battle, i.e. that's why he's good in areas like Hydra. But he's just decent. Increase accuracy, increase speed, and then AoE leech, and then the triple hitter A1 could be good for Fire Knight. A lot of people have used him in like Fire Knight hard compositions as your AoE DPS, but also helping you break the shield and just taking a lot of turns. But I always kind of saw him as a shadow of Nekmothar when it came to Hydra, so he was never kind of top tier for me. But I've seen a lot of people who swear by him, so I'm curious where you fit into that.
Yeah, I don't lie on either extreme on this guy. I did use him on my Fire Knight hard team for quite a while. So I would say that if you have a soul sitting for him, then maybe he's worth it. I know. So one of my viewers, he has him, a fairly endgame account. He not only has him, he has him 6-starred, and I think like +2 or +3, something like that. And I was blown away by the damage that this guy can do. So the ceiling is very high
Right.
if you have the empowerments and whatnot for him. But otherwise, yeah, I think when he came out at that point, I think he ranked higher than he is. Power creep in general, which affects pretty much everybody, but especially him. If you have a high blessing Phantom Touch, he's going to help you out in Fire Knight hard. Otherwise, yeah, okay, champion. Would I spend the 2 tokens? Probably not, unless I'm really struggling on Fire Knight. So next champion is Oella. Oella with, I think, no last name. I think she's just called Oella. She's actually a very, very good champion in my opinion. When she came out, again, she was one of the first Sylvan Watchers, and she was a fusion. So kind of similar to how Pelops, the ongoing fusion, is at the moment. And many people were not as high on her, but she brought something very unique when she first came out, which was the increased resistance buff. And that buff, I think, remains quite useful in certain compositions. Again, she's going to be very useful in the end game, not as much when you're in the mid game and such. I personally used her quite a lot in my Ice Golem Hard 10 team, along with it was a 2-man team, her and Artak for longest time, because she allows my Artak to be run with low resistance, because I can run the increased resistance buff with her, and she can also provide the healing on her A2, which is pretty fantastic. So she's a good champion, has niche usage though, but very good niche usage. She also features in the Titus teams for that very reason, and she's going to pair very nicely with Pelops if you're doing the fusion. Would I spend 2 tokens? End game, yes. Early mid game, probably not.
Yep. No, I can see that. I'll throw out there also her passive is fairly unique. It's kind of like Super Jereg, if people are familiar with that, where you just take a decent amount of damage, in case 15%. Max HP in a single hit, you just get a continuous heal. Awesome. So, she can provide a significant amount of healing, and this A2, it reads like a tiny amount of healing, but when you also account for the any and all continuous heals on your team, she extends the duration from 1 turn to 2 turns and top of healing them, and so like she's up there with like Wither the Crowned and Marichka type of massive healing potential, which is why she's a desirable pair for Artak when it comes to Ice Golem Hard. I used her, or I still use her mainly on my like Iron Twins team, believe it or not, because I have kind of a Mikage Ninja team, but it's more centered, or it was more centered around the old version of it, where like you actually needed like 700 resistance to not get Iron Brand stacks or whatever, and so she was kind of in the team to give my supports like Pythion, etc., high resistance they needed to not get debuffed. But I just kind of left her in the team because it didn't really change anything. But she's just kind of fun to use. But I think now more so it's like Titus wicks well, because you can build Titus with resistance, and she can bring increased resistance, and she's also a buff extender, so she fits perfectly in that style of composition. But yeah, is she worth the 2 tokens? Kind of hard to say if it's really worth it, depending upon where you are in your progression. But she could be a nice pickup, but I think you have better options overall.
Agreed. And that passive is so annoying, especially if you have done Faction Wars hard. And there are some stages in which you have to kill enemy teams when they have no buffs. And she's such a menace in those stages because of that passive, because she puts continuous heals on anybody whose HP goes down. So yeah, that's my trauma from seeing her in so many Faction Wars hard waves.
Yeah, there's a couple of fusions that are traumatizing in Faction Wars for sure, and definitely a lot of not fusions. Jingwon comes to mind. All right, next up we have Morrigaine, who I've always been a big fan of, and she's had some peaks and valleys in terms of utility, and I think right now she's kind of more peaking, definitely more so PvE focused. It's kind of where she's fallen. But even when she came out, she had a little bit of prowess in PvE. She was kind of touted as the Lysandra Light when she came out, and she's just not as good, and that kind of held her back. And a lot of people, myself included, kind of got her, put her in the vault, and kind of forgot about her. And then Amius came around, and we're like, hold on, protected heal reduction? And she definitely came out. She's not available, unfortunately, in every single rotation of Amius, but when she is useful, kind of just easy mode. She just takes turns, and he can't heal. doesn't really matter what else you do. You just stay alive and you take him out, and it's kind of trivial. And then with the Grimforce as well, there's a couple of bosses. I don't remember them by name exactly, but there's the healing lady, really annoying. You just put her on the team. She can't heal, very easy. And then Mimic as well. No matter what the mini Mimic does, you keep heal reduction on the Mimic, and he just can't heal. So really strong, mainly for the passive, but she can keep your team running with the Terminator Fill increased speed. This is a cool ability because it's one of those abilities that's nice where whatever might be useless for bosses transforms into something that is useful against bosses. So True Fear when you're using her if you use her in PvP, but Tigris actually if you use her in PvE. So pretty niche uses, but her niches are very, very strong for what she can do.
Yeah, definitely. I personally would, if I don't have her, I would spend the 2 tokens to get her, to be honest. Just because she has a niche, but she has a very good niche. Amius being one of them. But not just Amius, but also, like you mentioned, the Grim Forest bosses, but another boss I would like to highlight is the Fire Knight, especially the Fire Knight Hard. In Cintranos, what's it called? Soul Cross. There's a finite stage in which she's available, and she's fantastic because she boosts your team, provides increased speed on your own team. But yeah, she'll put the heal reduction on the Fire Knight. And if you know Fire Knight without using a lot of ally attack champions or freeze or turn meter reduction champions, then you know that Fire Knight can heal, and that can cause issues. If she's on the team, he is not healing as long as you get the shield down. And she can put the decreased speed with the A1 as well, which is super nice. Also helps in that fight. A very good champion, very niche champion, but many niches and a lot of versatility. Huge fan of Morrigaine.
Yeah, I think she's definitely kind of gotten better over time as they've released more and more content where heal reduction has become more useful. Because for the longest time, heal reduction was regarded as one of the most useless debuffs in the entire game, even to the point where they reworked the cursed set out of heal reduction. It used to be that, and now it's Hex, which is a lot more useful, but it was so useless they literally removed it from one of the gear sets in the game. So that kind of tells you everything you need to know. But last thing I'll point out here is that the heal reduction is for 2 turns. So it's very reliable. Once it's on there, it's basically not coming off unless whoever you're going against is super fast. And just an honorable mention, she can be sneaky annoying in PvP. Just heal reduction, it's protected. If it lands, whoever needs to heal that nuker who's really low, no healing. And she kind of is the Arbiter replacement type champion with the 112 base speed. So if you don't want to run Arbiter all the time where she gets banned, you have Morrigaine. She can be the substitute champion who's probably not going to get banned. No one's afraid of Morrigaine in live arena thinking. But definitely an option, a flex option for kind of your speed arena champion as well.
All right, next up is Gaius the Gleeful. He was a menace in PvP when he came out. He's also very useful, or he was useful in PvE as well. But he has this fantastic ability. He's a bomb champion. He does put the bombs on a 2-turn detonation. However, he places sleep, and that was so annoying for the longest time. And then he can activate the bomb on his A3 as well, even through Unkillable, for example. When he came out, it was fantastic. Not as relevant in today's meta. Also, as the meta grew, there came in more champions which were Force Affinity basically, and there he has a chance to weak hit and not place the bombs, for example. That was one of the reasons that he was not able to be relevant anymore. His passive is also pretty insane, where he basically places bombs whenever he's hit, and he also instantly detonates whenever he's killed, which is pretty fantastic. There were strategies I remember that were built around him. Not as relevant today. Would I spend the 2 tokens? Probably not. But let's see. Let's watch the meta evolving. Who knows? Bombs might become super prevalent in the meta in the future, and then he might become useful. At the moment, I'm never not spending 2 tokens if I don't have him.
Yeah, as much as it pains me to say, he's definitely not worth the 2 tokens, but he is, I think, my favorite bomber in the game still. I do use him a ton. I think he's gone through so many phases, ups and downs as the metas changes. They've introduced things. When he came out, super strong. When Stone Skin came out, he was in the middle because it's a 2-turn. But if there's any cleanser on the team in Stone Skin, useless. And then Polymorph took him out of the meta. Then Pinpoint kind of gave him a little edge. And then Mercurial's kind of killing bombers again. So it's been back and forth for sure. But I still use him. I basically pair him with a lockout champion. That way that they can't do anything for the one turn. And then I come back. Or sometimes they A1, they target him because he's squishy and they just die. And it's super fun to see the entire team blow up. So super niche, but he's just a fun bomb champion, but probably not worth the 2 tokens. Unfortunately, it hurts me to say that. But yeah, he's definitely my favorite bomber in the game.
For a while, he was mine as well. But then Nishak came out.
Yeah, so Nishak is definitely stronger, but the amount of times that I've gotten just counterattacked and killed as Nishak, because it's 2 turns in order to make the similar bomb capabilities, just kind of annoyed me enough that I prefer using Gaius if I can get away with it. But I definitely use Nishak more, to be fair. All right, next up we have Hurndig, or Hurndog as I like to call him, another one of my favorite champions. And he's kind of like we talked about earlier, similar to Tholin. I think Tholin is more so kind of longer fights tuned as far as scaling his attack up. Hurndig is definitely more, if at all, kind of just short fights. But I think in the current day and age, his only claim to fame is just Dark Fae. He is objectively the best champion for that because all of his abilities are helpful in any form. He can reset or extra turn on the A1, but he can also reset the AoE. Fully deplete the target's turn meter here, which again, good for the Dark Fae. And then AoE decrease defense helps you do damage. Decrease actually is kind of a bonus. So he's definitely kind of a one-man army when it comes to Dark Fae, and he's kind of the linchpin of my particular team that I run there. But in the, is he really worth the 2 tokens just for the Dark Fae? Not really. I think there are many solutions to Dark Fae that have turn meter suppression in some form and or anti-max HP in their kit. So he's not needed, but if you do have him already, he could be good for those roles.
Yeah, and I think I'm one of those people because I do not have him. He's one of the champions that I do not have. So this is a decision that I have to make, whether I want to go for him or not. When he came out, I remember it was one of the first months that I started playing. And of course, I couldn't fuse him, didn't have the resources or anything like that. And then he was actually quite popular at that time. He was used by a lot of content creators in a lot of teams because his kit was quite ahead of its time, I would say. Is it staying in that place? As an endgame player, probably I'm not going for him. But if you don't have a good Dark Fae option, yeah, certainly a very good champion. If you don't have a very good wave-based damage dealer, he's certainly another very good champion. As we were talking about with Tholin as well, dwarves do not have a lot of good PvE wave-based damage. There are a few champions. Hurndig is definitely one of them. Yeah. I personally, as an endgame player, very likely I'm not going to go for him just because I am in that territory that I don't really need him. But I can see people who in the mid game or further might want to go for him.
Yeah, that's pretty much where he should be. Again, it pains me to say that, but because he's definitely one of my favorites. But he just doesn't quite have enough like oomph in the modern era to really say, yeah, must get. He's a nice to have, and he's very useful if you have him. But is he better than your other options? Probably not.
All right, next up is Kroz Wallbreaker. And I just asked Kads what his name was, so you can understand how much I value him already. He's one of the recent fusions. He was I think November fusion, a bomb champion. For whatever reason, I was not thinking straight. I actually ran masteries on him because I was not planning to build him out or anything like that. And I tested him out, and I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan whatsoever of Kroz Wallbreaker. He's a bomber, but there are other bombers in here. Some of them we've already talked about, who are better. What he brings, which is different from them, is that he brings the block active skills, which is again quite nice for your mythical champions. And in general, if you have enough accuracy on him, this debuff is quite nice to block out any champion who could remove the bombs in that sense. But otherwise, he doesn't bring anything unique. He's just a bomb champion. And I don't think he has a redeeming quality to him. Other than that, his speed is actually quite decent with 110. I'm not a huge fan, would not advise spending the 2 tokens on getting him. What do you think, Rob, about this, Cats?
Yeah, I would say like this is the type of champion where if this is your last thing that you need to get Polara, which is a ridiculously endgame goal, and you're like, I can't do this bomb trial in Faction Wars hard mode, this is your guy if you don't have War Mother, I guess. But outside of that, he's just one of the weak. He's kind of on the same, maybe a little tier above Lord Shazar in terms of all the bomb champions, legendaries in the game. He's just not as good. This ability, it read super well, but not giving you an actual extra turn is so disappointing. And your enemies can cut in before you can get around to reducing it, and they can just cleanse it off. And that's just the most disheartening thing ever when you see it happen. He's just Nishek 0.5. He's not up there, and it's just not. Yeah, I thought he was going to be better, but that said, he helped me with the trial. I went for him. It was worth it during the fusion. Would I go for him in this system? Probably not.
Yeah, but with that said, as you pointed out, for Faction Wars Hard, in the end, he might end up being one of the champions who people go for most because of that very reason. Because Ogryns lack a good bomber, and if people want to push to get Polara, then he's definitely going to be one option that's going to be available for many players.
Yeah, I think that's a problem for people in like 2028. As you get closer to Polara, I feel like if that's your last stage, you're cruising through Faction Wars Hard mode. All right, next up we have Granyt Doorkeep, or Grant. Some people say Grant, but I think it's Granyt. Interesting champion who definitely kind of came out with a mixed amount of fanfare, I will say. But he is another one of the more recent, but more like Hydra, longer boss battle focused champions. He's like Super Ugo here with the block buffs. Increased attack as well before attacking, decreased defense, so kind of solid set in the table for himself and or other nukers. He is extremely unique in that he's one of the few champions in the game who provides Shatter, which improves your ignore defense effects, as well as crit damage, which improves your damage. Even though it's or he provides the buffs on everyone, but it's a single target attack. And then he can ignore all of these things, but then if you're not under those things, it does more damage. And for some reason, the second part actually hits harder than the first part, which is weird, but extra turn if he kills an enemy. So he can be a sneaky DPS. He is HP based. He's relatively tanky, but I think his problem is that you kind of have to fight for gear as you get to the end game. If you have Predator, if you have Empress, you have Nice if you're lucky. So there's a lot of HP based nukers that he's kind of fighting for gear. So he could be useful if you're really struggling. You need a tankier nuker who can kind of be somewhat utility DPS, but also have some potential in arena. He could be useful. He's also kind of a Fabian with his passive here. He just removes all CC aside from sheep and block active skills. But yeah, he's kind of in the middle. He could be worth it, but I think he's relatively niche. What are your thoughts?
Ooh, anybody who's known me for a bit knows this. I am the biggest Granyt fan since day one.
Okay. Convince me.
I absolutely love this champion. So Granyt is an HP based champion, which means he's naturally very tanky with that almost 25k HP, which is bonkers. Very good speed, very good kit. The AoE Shatter is a buff that many people just undervalue. So when he came out, and again there were mixed opinions, so I actually made like a PowerPoint presentation on what Shatter can do. And the fact that paired with certain gear sets, the 15% no defense that you get from Shatter, it actually helps tremendously, especially even at like mid game when you don't have your area bonuses maxed out for the Hydra, for example. The Shatter fills that gap. It's 15% in just one buff, as opposed to 20% that you'll get by spending so many medals. And if you have like 35% ignore defense from Merciless, 15% off of Shatter, if, for example, if you can get a Cascade or something, there are cases in which, or for example, if your area bonus is maxed out with 20%, it can get to a stage where it might make sense to not run Helm Smasher even. Again, I've done the calculations in that video. If somebody's interested, please check that out. But Shatter is incredible. But the thing is that Granyt, if he just had nothing but just AoE Shatter in his kit, he would be fantastic. But no, he brings the increased crit damage, helpful. He hits incredibly hard. One of the hardest hitting abilities is his A3. And then if you can kill somebody, which very likely that you will, you get an extra turn and then put the defense down and block buffs on the A2. And his A1 is fantastic as well. In Faction Wars Hard, if you know the boss, it's the Tainted Dweller, and he places the reflect damage. He can just go and remove it, no questions asked. Ignores defense as well. His passive, he himself cannot get CCs. Fantastic champion. I personally run him in a 9-piece protection set, which gives even more utility to the two buffs, the shatter and the crit damage buff that he provides. I'm high on this guy, and I'm seeing a lot more positive opinions on him as well. Recently, I've watched a couple of other videos, including Ashes, where they've been positively surprised by this guy, and I've been blowing this trumpet since day one. Granyt is awesome, guys. Try him out. Give him good gear. He deserves it. Very good champion. Definitely worth the 2 tokens.
Okay, respect. I'll defer to you on that one. I don't actually use him. To my earlier point, like I still use White King Narcisse. I have my Empress, and I just don't have enough gear to really give him a fair shake compared to those two in terms of countering the things I see the most often. But I have been hearing slightly more positive takes on him as of late. But I did go for him. I do have him. So if I change my mind, he is there to be used.
Looking forward to that. Looking forward to hearing good things about Granyt in the future. All right, next up is Lysanthir Beastbane. He was also champion, I believe, from last year. He is the one champion from last year that I actually skipped on purpose, and that tells you where I stand on this guy, which is not very high. Lysanthir Beastbane is not a good champion overall. I think he brings Hex on the A1, I believe, but it's not the best single target. Any kind of AoE would have been put him slightly higher in the usage. A2 again, not a utility ability either. Again, he can use this ability, but that means that he should be doing damage, and he doesn't do a lot of damage, unfortunately. Then talking about his A3, we have the decrease speed and weaken, which is AoE. So it can be useful in the Hydra, but he does bring like 3 decent buffs for the Hydra, but you have other champions who can do that and much more. We just talked about Mad Hatter, who's one of the best in this tier, should be a tier above. We're lucky that it's not. Lysanthir is just not it. Not a fan. Would not spend 1 token on him as well.
Interesting. Okay. I'm kind of in the middle on Lysanthir. I think he got a bad rap and people didn't really showcase him to like his full potential. I think it is also, well, I think Hex on the A1 is relatively ignorable. Like I just pretend that doesn't exist and you bring another Hex champion. Also because if the targets are under Hex, then he places these debuffs before attacking. So that's awkward with his own single target thing. So bring Hex and then he might be more useful. But I think his power, if at all, lies within the A2, and he's kind of like a Georgid Door A1 type of champion where if this repeats, it does a lot of damage, but when it doesn't, it does an okay amount of damage. So if you really set your team up around this merciless set, spam this ability, it might actually amount to something. But you kind of have to architect a team to really make him shine, and that sometimes that's not really what you want in your champion. You want them to kind of stand on their own 2 feet. So I definitely agree that he's probably not worth the 2 tokens, unfortunately. But I do think he gets a little bit of a bad rap. But that said, he's sitting in my vault unused. So make of that what you will.
I was just going to ask you that, knowing that you've used him and you have a slightly favorable opinion of him, would you advise me to go for him as an endgame account?
Absolutely not. I think most endgame people are going to have better DPSs for Hydra when you're 3-4 or however many years in. All right, next up we have Stokk the Broken, who I think when he came out was another one of those underrated champions who people are just like, meh, I have a Teodor, who cares about this guy? And to some people that made sense, although I run them together, but I digress. But super strong, AoE poison, but can also be, or also brings continuous heals. Somewhat ignorable, but if you do set him up with someone else with an HP burn, it's 3 poisons and a weaken, but it kind of depends on the team. And then he's a poison activator, and I'm glad they updated this text to actually describe what it does. So it's 1 tick of all poisons, not all poisons, as opposed to people like Blizaar the Lost, Eleanor, Xavi, etc., where they do all poisons all at once. So, or an Ezio as well. But he can be, just your standard poison activator, single target or single tick poison activator, but more importantly, the AoE HP burn. So anywhere you want HP burn, explosion, spider, nether spider, etc., and arena as well. You can use him for that. The passive here was the part that people just kind of forgot or didn't pay enough attention to, but he had a little bit of a heyday in the recent months, where his poisons and burns, as long as he's on the team, doesn't have to do anything, doesn't have to be his poisons or poisons, but they just ignore block damage and unkillable. So people were throwing him with a Nell, and you just sit there, Marichka, doesn't matter, they all die. Mercurial is kind of coming in to kind of hopefully kill the Nell meta. But if your opponents aren't set up for that, they're not prepared, you can definitely take them by surprise, and they can just die when they think they're protected. Cernic, Lady Noelle, all the unkillable block damage champions out there, especially if you have people who can place non-ignorable debuffs, it can be very, very devastating just by having him on the team, not necessarily doing anything, but he can also come around and activate any and all of the debuffs on them. So he's a sneaky champion who can do a lot of damage that you might not expect.
He's one of the champions that I do not have. I was not able to get him when his fusion was live, and it's one of my biggest regrets, because recently I actually got a Nell, and then Mercurial came around. So I'm actually hoping the opposite of you, and I'm hoping the meta comes back, because now I can actually get him with these 2 tokens. You can build him like he's a champion that, forget all of his skills, just the passive, just that passive, it just makes him so good. Yeah, I would love to get him, and I would love to run him still in certain teams in the siege mode, for example. So I would love to get him as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I am Nell-less myself, unfortunately, but definitely his kind of claim to fame, at least in the more recent months. But for your sake, I guess I hope that Mercurial doesn't take over. But I have a feeling that players are pretty simple-minded in that regard, and they gravitate toward whatever works. So we'll see. Yeah. We'll see what happens.
All right, the next champion is Blizaar. Blizaar is actually a pretty cool champion. I think people undervalue him, but he, again, for Faction Wars Hard, he was my hard carry all the way through, just based on the tremendous amount of freezes that he throws out. He's an Ogren. Yeah, he's an Ogren tribes.
Oh, yeah.
He's pretty fantastic. He is also one of those champions that's very annoying to kill, because you have to kill him 3 times. He comes back with Revive on Death, kill him again, comes right back. You have to, very hard to kill. He has the Ally Protect, he has the AoE freeze, and he also has the single target, or rather 3 times at random freeze, which is insane. He is very, very good at controlling waves. This 3 at random can freeze so many people at the same time. And he's also one of the champions who has a reasonable land rate on the AA1 with the freeze, which means that he can come into your Finite Hard team. So I think he's a pretty good champion. People who are lacking options for Finite Hard definitely should go for this guy. I certainly, again, depending on if you are lacking that option, I would certainly go for him. Otherwise, again, if you are also set on Faction Wars Hard, then maybe not, but he's a fantastic champion. I'm huge on this guy. How about yourself, Kads?
He's in an interesting spot where I do think overall people don't rate him that highly. He kind of fell by the wayside. And I didn't use him for the longest time, but Faction Wars Hard brought him out in spades, because I was like, I have no control in this faction at all. Oh wait, AoE freeze and freeze A1. Never mind.
Yeah,
I can control waves now, and I can get past stage 5 or whatever. So yeah, he's serviceable. He's not super strong, but he is serviceable. CC champions are relatively hard to come by, especially in certain factions. I think, obviously, if you have the choice between him and a Newt in tier 1, okay, go for the Newt, right? If you want the Finite Hard prowess, but he can be kind of a tandem alongside of that to do some work. But yeah, I do think the passive is more just like enemy wave annoyance at this point. It's just like, all right, how many times we got to kill Blizaar before he stays dead and we can move on? But
and people have a lot of like Sand Devil teams as well with him because of that passive. True. It's a slow team, but it does work.
Next up, we have Walking Tomb Dreng, who is another fairly unique champion. Definitely did not receive a lot of fanfare when he initially came out. Just the kit didn't read as well, I guess. But over time, he's kind of seen some waxes and wanes. I think he's in a healthy spot, though, overall, where he has a niche, and it's a very unique niche that is useful. But his claim to fame, irresistible AoE HP burn on a 3-turn cooldown. There's only 2 champions who have it in the game, and he has it on the lowest cooldown on an AoE, at least. And then he can come around and activate stuff on the A1, which is useful. And then he can do damage with this a little bit, but you're probably going to build it more as a support, so he really just decreases the cooldown of the AoE, so it can spam more irresistible HP burns. But relatively simple, straightforward kit. Decent amount of, or a pretty substantial heal if you set it up right here with the equalizing of HP. But yeah, just kind of one of the champions who can, or one of the few champions with the irresistible HP burn. Great for Frost Spider, good for normal Spider, hard mode included. Just making sure that whenever you place the burn, it will land. There is no 3% anything here. It's irresistible.
Yep, I completely agree. Fantastic champion for that very reason. I used him alongside Artak in my Ice Golem Heart team for some time. Pretty insane champion for that very reason. I know a lot of people also run, for example, him alongside Aniri if you don't have a ninja or Sand Devil 25. Because of that irresistible burn, don't need to build any accuracy, just build him tanky. And you can, for example, give him, and again, it was more prevalent earlier when the Brimstone did not need accuracy. If you had a 3-star, 4-star Brimstone, then people would just run him in Sand Devil with that. But unfortunately, now that only makes sense if you have a 6-star because you will need to build accuracy. Good champion in one niche. Would I spend 2 tokens? Only if you're lacking an AoE HP burner, I would say. Yes, the 3% resist is annoying, but I don't know if it's worth the 2 tokens.
Yeah, agreed. I'd say this is definitely more of an end game, like min-maxing kind of pickup where it's like, I just, that one fail spider run every 60 runs, like, all right, let's clean that up. That's kind of where he fits in. But if you have any other AoE HP burner that does the job, you're probably fine.
So next up is Bivald of the Thorn. He's actually a pretty good champion. When he came out, there were mixed reactions to him. I am a fan. I did use him, and so he's one of the first champions who had this cool ability where you had the chance of landing debuffs even if you weak hit, including Leech and Provoke. So this was when Hydra was changed for the first time, and we had the Head of Decay being able to get provoked, and this is like 3 years ago by now. And for that, he's a very good champion because he can land that provoke AoE, so you don't need to target the Head of Decay, he's just going to land it. The Leech is super useful in the Hydra as well. And then the Strengthen is a bonus in damage mitigation. He also brings the Provoke on the A1. Just in case your A2 is on cooldown, then he can also go in and Provoke with the A1. A3 places a shield and a little bit of healing. Not his best ability in my opinion, but I think he's a good champion. If you're lacking a good provoker for the Hydra early to mid game, I think worth spending the 2 tokens to get him. Otherwise, anywhere beyond mid game, I personally don't see a use for him.
Yeah, I'd echo a similar sentiment. I probably a little less fan of him. I think he does have a solid niche. Hydra focused. He is unique in that he can land things through weak hits, kind of contra the Cyclone-esque in that regard. But I think he's not too one-dimensional, but kind of in the same vein of like he's kind of just the Hydra guy, and or maybe Magma Dragon can lock that guy down. So it could be worth it if that's exactly what you need, but you could also be better served by saving for other people. So I think kind of depends what you're missing, what you're looking for, and how many tokens you have to spare. All right, coming near the end here, we've got Tatura Rimehide, who a champion who I have had mixed feelings about over the years. It's kind of been ups and downs. Perfect Veil is crazy rare for some reason on champions. I don't know why. We need more Perfect Veil champions. Like, that's the rarest thing in the game in terms of like Hydra utility, and it's so useful in Hydra, almost mandatory depending upon your teams, although a lot of people just go without it, so maybe it's not that mandatory. But I digress. He is one of the few champions you can place Perfect Veil on everyone except himself, And then he also can place block debuffs, increase defense, decrease accuracy on the A1. He's gone through a lot of waves of utility. He used to be like a mainstay for Bommel early on, because you just spam the A1, decrease accuracy. It's a 2-turn cooldown on a A1, which is 1 turn. So he was useful there. A little bit of play in Hydra, but I'll note that whenever he uses this, he fears himself. So that's unfortunate there in terms of the Veil. He plays on everyone but himself, so he just fears himself. So you may or may not actually get this ability afterward, because he 50-50 chance. And then the decrease accuracy, I wish this was an AoE, I honestly do. So he can do some things. Passive can be annoying. You can freeze people, reflect damage. So if you're not paying attention, you might kill your nukers when you try to attack him. But yeah, is he worth the 2 tokens for a meh Hydra-ish champion nowadays? Probably not.
I think I disagree with you on there. I think
okay.
I think he has a very unique kit, just in the sense of the abilities that he brings. I'm a fan. I didn't use him for quite a long time when he first came out. Then I built him out, and I've used him recently in very endgame. I've used him quite a lot, and especially in my Faction Wars Hard team. Because he brings a lot of useful stuff. He brings the freeze, which is very useful against the Tetsuya on wave 2. He brings the decreased accuracy on the A1, which is very useful against the boss to avoid the provokes and the fears. And of course, he brings protection in the sense of increased defense and block debuffs. And so you mentioned Hydra. Of course, he is very useful. The Perfect Veil is very useful for the Hydra. So is block debuffs. But also the Chimera. Very few champions bring so much utility. Perfect Veil, again, if you go aiming for trials on the Chimera, he brings Perfect Veil, he brings increased defense, decreased accuracy, block debuffs, so many things in one kit. So he's actually quite useful. With that, coupled with that, he's a defense-based champion, but look at his HP stat. It's quite high. He's very difficult to kill as well. So I'm a fan. He also has a good defense aura in case you need it. But I think if people are going for the Chimera trials, I think he can be super useful. In the end of Faction Wars Hard, for niche teams over there, can be super useful. And of course in the Hydra as well. So actually I am a fan of Tatura.
Okay, point taken. Yeah, I've not actually seen anyone talk about him relative to Chimera, but it is a good shout if your focus is on the trials. Perfect Veil trial, increased defense trial come to mind. Maybe blocking the stuns on the rim for him as well, maybe. Yeah. I don't know if Decrease Accuracy is a trial.
There's also a trial which needs block debuffs.
Okay. Oh, okay. There you go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good shout. I'll mention the auras and Doom Towers only, unfortunately.
There's only Doom Tower. That's my bad.
Yeah. But maybe... do you think he needs a buff? Or do you think he's fine as he is? Do you think they could tweak it a little bit?
I think he's fine as it is. If they do buff him, he gets quite high at the meta. Might become very, very useful. They have done so with some champions, but I don't think he's on very high in the buff list.
Fair enough.
There are many more champions who are more deserving, I would say.
Yep. The All-10 does exist, for sure.
All right. The final champion, and let's see. It is Maulie Tankard. And Maulie is an interesting champion, very old school. She's seen many ups and downs in the meta. She has a very simple kit. She has 3 abilities or 2 abilities rather, and a passive, which also means that she's a very good champion for the reflex set, because it's just 1 ability and then you can rotate back. There's only 1 ability that requires a cooldown refresh, and you can get back to it faster. The 2-turn provoke is very, very unique. And for the Hydra, for the Head of DK, you need that. Super useful. The reflect damage on all allies is also, of course, useful. But one of the best things about her is her passive. Or actually, she has 2 abilities. I forgot about the revive. I should not have forgotten about the revive. The passive is super useful because the turn meter boost, especially in a longer fight like the Hydra, you get back, or you get your allies to take turns a lot. And it fills turn meters by 25% when she's hit by a boss, which in the Hydra fight, of course, is going to happen quite a lot. And then she has a revive. Even though it's not the best revive, she does put a block damage on. That's better than like just a simple revive, 50% turn meter only. I did use her and up until I think a couple of months ago, in my Faction Wars Hard 21 farm team, as my revive champion. However, with Hilvi coming out, and I think Hilvi is just better in many sense, I think she's not going to see as much usage. With that said, if you don't have Hilvi and you're needing a dwarf reviver, she's actually quite nice with a very good passive and the 2-turn provoke. Is it worth it for the 2 tokens? Potentially, yes. If you're lacking a good provoker and reviver for the Hydra.
Yeah, I definitely echo that sentiment. I got her, I want to say like 3 months ago, so super, super late. And so she was just too late to make it into my Hydra teams. They've been set in stone for a couple years now. But I wish I had her earlier on, because like the 2-turn provoke was something I wanted for the longest time. I will throw out there, she is one of the champions that actually made it possible for me to do S19 of Centranos with the Taurus and Marichka. Having the 2-turn provoke or 1 or 2-turn provoke actually allowed me to do something without instantly dying to the Tauruses every time. So that was a unique thing. And I'll just echo once again the passive. You would think this would be the opposite direction, but she gets more turn meter when it's a boss, not less. Most abilities passives are less effective against bosses. This is one champion where it's actually more effective. So it's a lot of turn meter. It adds up. You book it down to 1-turn cooldown. All she has to do is take a turn, which is very easy when she's getting all the turn meter, getting hit and whatnot, and she can cycle through her abilities very, very well on top of that. And then I'll just throw out there, a lot of people misread this. She does not place an HP burn. She can do more damage if the target is under burn, but she doesn't have burn in her kit, which is awkward. But nonetheless, if you do build her for damage, it's a decent amount of damage because she has a relatively high base defense, even though she is
really?
a support.
I've actually never built her for damage.
Yeah, it's not, she's not going to kill, a bunch of people in PvP, but when you add it with War Master and whatnot, if she can hit decently hard, especially if they're under a burn, because it's just 1.5 X, and then you book the damage as well. But yeah, so I think we made it through. We made it through the entire list of tier 2 champions. So the main goal here is to kind of, talk about who might be a decent value here. It's only 2 tokens compared to tier 1, which is 3 tokens. So it would take you just objectively longer to get it. And obviously, as you start to move down the tiers, you're not going to have, the cream of the crop, at least relative to Plarium's rankings here. But there are, I think we've mentioned a decent amount of good value champions that could be worth it depending upon your situations.
Definitely. I think there are some champions here which I think belong in tier 1. Just from like the categorization, I would say Mad Hatter comes to mind. But it's a good thing that they're in tier 2, which means that we can get them faster. So certainly a few good champions are that are here. There are some champions which probably belong in tier 3 or tier 4, if that ever existed. But overall, I think solid number of champions here, well worth pursuing if you don't have them.
All right, so that is going to do it for this video. Thanks again to SMZ for joining me here and discussing the lovely champions here in the tier 2 of the token exchange systems. Any final thoughts on anything we covered today?
I think we covered everything pretty well. A lot of champions here, some very good champions that are placed in this tier. Overall, I'm a fan of the system. I wish that they also allowed the fragment fusions to be at least giving tokens, if not replacing the champions. But overall, pretty good direction for the game and some solid champions in this tier. But I think we've covered everything else.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree. At the very least, I think you should be able to earn a token from fragment summons because it's a similar amount of work. It's a little bit less, but realistically, it's about the same. But yeah, so we did film a part 1 talking about tier 1 champions. So if you want our thoughts on that one, once again, you can check out that video. We'll try to link it in the description box of this video. And of course, feel free to check out his channel as well. This is a collaboration, so you can see that in that menu, but also it will be linked in the description box down below. So thank you once again to SMZ for joining me in this video, and take care, guys. Have a good one.